The candle was the only thing moving. Everything else in that room was still. The pine walls, the folded quilt at the foot of the bed, my hands, which I had pressed flat against my thighs because I didn't know what else to do with them. Outside, I could hear the last of the wagons pulling away, the sound of hooves on cold dirt, voices fading. I was 17 years old. I was someone's wife. And before that night ended, I did something no one in my community ever knew about. My name is Rebecca, and this is where I tell the stories I kept quiet for years. If you're new here, subscribe. These videos are for anyone who has ever had to protect something in themselves that the world didn't have room for. Tell me in the comments, what have you held on to? I had been standing in front of that mirror for almost 10 minutes. The dress was plain, the way all our dresses were plain, dark blue, full length, no buttons that weren't functional. My hair was pinned under my prayer cap, so tightly I could feel the pressure at my temples. The room smelled like pine and candle wax and something older underneath, something that had lived in that farmhouse longer than I had been alive. I remember thinking, this is the last morning I will stand in a room alone and be just Rebecca. I didn't know yet what that meant. The dress had been made by 6 women. My mother, my aunts, 3 women from our church district who had known me since I was small enough to be carried. They had quilted and pinned and hemmed for 3 evenings in our kitchen, talking quietly, laughing sometimes, their hands never stopping. I had sat at the edge of the room and watched them work. Every stitch felt like a decision being made about my life that I hadn't been asked to weigh in on. The dress was beautiful. I want to be honest about that. It was genuinely beautiful, and I could barely breathe inside it. I was 17. In the world outside our district, 17 meant junior year. It meant Friday nights and college applications, and not yet knowing who you were. In our community, 17 meant you were ready. Ready was not a feeling. It was a determination made by others on your behalf. I had been baptized at 16, which meant I had taken my vow before God and the church. I had accepted the Ordnung, the rules that ordered every part of our lives, from the width of a hat brim to the hours of a Sunday. I had said yes to all of it. I was ready. I had been told so. Here is something I need you to understand before I go any further. Before that night ended, I did something I had never told anyone, something that could have cost me everything I had ever known. But to understand why I did it, you have to understand how I got to that room. You have to understand what it meant in my world to be a girl who wanted something different and had no language for that wanting. What I did was small. It looked like nothing. And it was the bravest thing I had ever done. Jacob was not a bad man. I want to say that clearly because this story could easily become something it isn't, a story about a villain. Jacob was 22. He had his father's farm and his father's steadiness, and a faith that was as natural to him as breathing. He had been raised to believe that a good husband provided, protected, and led his household in the fear of God. He believed all of that. He was not unkind. He was not cruel. He was simply someone who had never once been asked to question the world he lived in, because for him, that world fit perfectly. The matching had happened the way most things happened in our community, quietly through conversations between families shaped by land and lineage, and the quiet arithmetic of Gelassenheit. Gelassenheit is the yielding, the letting go of your own will in favor of God's will, as expressed through the community. I had been taught this since before I could read. I had been taught that wanting something for yourself, wanting it loudly, wanting it badly, was a kind of pride. And pride was the first crack in a foundation. So I had learned to want quietly, or to not want at all, or to pretend. There had been someone else once. His name was Daniel, and I had met him at singings, the Sunday evening gatherings where young people sat across from each other and sang hymns from the Osbund and sometimes, if you were careful, passed a note folded very small. Daniel had kind eyes and a laugh that started slow. We had talked for 3 singings in a row. On the 4th, he wasn't there. I found out later his family had moved 2 districts over. I found out even later that it wouldn't have mattered anyway. His father had no land, and land was the quiet currency of everything. I had not cried. I had learned by then that crying changed nothing. My friend Ruth had gotten married the year before me. She was 18, which felt older, though looking back I understand it wasn't. A few months after her wedding, we were hanging laundry together in the late afternoon, her sheets, her husband's shirts, and she reached over without saying anything and took my hand, held it for a moment, then let go, and went back to the washing. She never explained the gesture. I never asked, but I thought about it for months afterward, and I thought about it again that morning, standing in front of my mirror, hands pressed flat, candle burning. Hold on to yourself, I thought. Whatever is coming, hold on. The ceremony was held in my parents' barn. 300 people, maybe more. Benches borrowed from half the district, arranged in long rows. Men on one side and women on the other. No flowers. No music except our voices. The bishop stood at the front and spoke about duty and covenant and the sacred ordering of a household. I sat very still. I had learned stillness the way some children learn piano, through repetition, through correction, through the slow understanding that movement drew attention, and attention was dangerous. Jacob sat across from me. At one point our eyes met. He looked as serious as I felt. Neither of us smiled. When the vows came, I said the words. My voice was steady. I remember being surprised by that, the steadiness of my own voice when everything inside me was a held breath. The bishop asked if I would submit to my husband as unto the Lord. I said yes. The congregation said amen. And something in the room shifted, the way air shifts before a storm, that barely perceptible change in pressure. I looked at my mother in the third row. She was watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before and have never been able to fully name since. Not sorrow, not pride, something in between that had no word in our language. After the ceremony came the meal. Tables of food that women had been preparing for 2 days. Roast chicken and mashed potatoes and pies lined up on every flat surface. People laughed. Children ran between legs. Someone told a story about my father that made the older men lean in and grin. This is the part that is hardest to explain to someone who grew up outside. How much warmth there was. How real it was. These people loved me. I had grown up inside that love. It had held me through every winter and every loss and every ordinary Tuesday. And it was also, at the same time, the walls of something I had never chosen to enter. I saw Ruth near the dessert table. She was holding a baby on her hip, her daughter, 7 months old, with her husband's dark eyes. Ruth looked tired in the specific way that new mothers look tired, deep and settled. But when she saw me crossing the room toward her, something moved across her face. She shifted the baby to her other hip and reached out and straightened the collar of my dress, the way an older sister might. You're going to be all right, she said. Not a question. I nodded. We both knew she wasn't only talking about the day. Sometime in the late afternoon, while the celebration was still full, I slipped upstairs. The room Jacob and I would share that night was at the end of the hall, small, clean, a wedding quilt, folded at the foot of a narrow bed. Someone had set a candle on the windowsill. The light was already going gold outside. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment, just breathing. Underneath the bed, I had placed something 2 nights before, when I had come to help with the preparations and found myself alone in this room for 3 unwitnessed minutes. A small tin, the kind that once held hard candies. I had carried it inside my coat. I pulled the tin out and held it in both hands. Inside were 7 pages, folded twice. I had written them the week before my wedding, one each night, by lamplight, after the house went quiet. They were not a plan. They were not a letter to anyone. They were just me, the things I actually thought. The things I had never said aloud because there was no space in my world to say them. What I loved, what I feared, what I had wanted when I was 12 and the wanting felt simple and clean. What I wanted still. I had written my own name at the top of the first page in my own handwriting like a claim. I put the tin back. I straightened up. And I stood there in that quiet room, in my wedding dress, with my hands finally still at my sides, and I understood something I had not been able to articulate before. I was not going to leave. I did not have a plan. I did not have anywhere to go. But I had those pages. And as long as those pages existed, hidden, unread, entirely mine, there was a part of me that no ceremony could reach. No vow could touch it. No ordnung could govern it. It was the first thing in my life that belonged only to me. I cried then, quietly, the way I did everything, and it felt like relief. Jacob and I lived together for 11 years. That is its own long story, one I'm not ready to tell all at once. What I will tell you is this: I kept the tin. Through every move, every hard season, every moment when I felt myself going thin and distant, I kept it. I never added to it. I never needed to. Those 7 pages were enough to remind me that I had existed before that room, and that I would exist after it, and that the self I was most afraid of losing was still there, folded twice, waiting. If you are carrying something like that, something small and hidden and entirely your own, don't let it go. That thing is not a secret. That thing is the truest version of you. And no one, no system, no silence has the right to take it.